This is the Advanced Passenger Train, or APT. In 1981, this high-speed tilting train was poised to revolutionise railway travel. But the British government lost faith in their pioneering engineers, and in 1986, the APT was abandoned. In the 1800s, British railway pioneers were national heroes. From this crumbling factory in Newcastle, George and Robert Stephenson built the machines that changed the world. Soon, these rusting winches will be buffed up and the site restored with lottery money. Gambling on leisure and heritage is now a safer bet than on iron and steel. But at one time in these drawing offices, Robert Stephenson designed the rocket and sent the Industrial Revolution into orbit.
This is locomotion. This is what George Stephenson built 4 years before the rocket in 1825. So this isn't the rocket, and rocket wasn't the first. This is a beam engine going for a walk. In fact, it's two little beam engines. And driving this is like driving a colliery winding engine. The only awkward bit is you've got to do two at once.
Before George Stephenson became known as the father of the railways, he learnt his trade by getting his hands dirty. Working as an engineer in the coalfields of northeast England, he was surrounded by winding engines which pumped out waterlogged pits. By miniaturising cylinders like this and fixing them on small high-pressure boilers, he created a simple piece of locomotive machinery. But Stephenson's real flair was for spotting other people's good ideas.
Stephenson was not that original. What he did best was draw together the ideas from other people. There's Murray's slide valve, not Stephenson's. Here's a boiler. This is a Trevithick boiler. Fremantle valve gear, not Stephenson. It goes on and on. This is not pure Stephenson genius.
Stephenson's spectacular machine was financed by a group of local coal barons, but they weren't interested in providing passengers with pleasant-day returns. The locomotive was developed to replace the horse and shift their coal.
Nearly all the early experiments were concerned with industrial movement of goods, basically coal. So they had a lot of coal, it was very heavy, it had to be moved, and an engine could do the job. This was a great roaring, raging beast. Cinders coming out from the chimney, rattling over these very short lengths of track, and they made a huge impression.
Before fire-spitting machines took to the rails, man's greatest invention, the wheel, had been getting stuck in primordial sludge for years. Just south of Newcastle, industrial archaeologists have discovered a relic from the very birth of railways, a wooden wagonway. For centuries, horse-drawn wagons took coal from the pits to major rivers in the northeast. From there, it was shipped down south and abroad. Until now, not much was known about the technology of early rail. Incredibly, this 18th century wagonway has many of the features of its modern-day counterpart. The roughly hewn oak tracks with a gauge of 4'2" are fitted to even more basic sleepers. As today, guide rails are used to prevent derailment, but the most remarkable feature are the crude points. No moving parts here. Early railway workers had to heave the wagons from track to track. By the early 1800s, metal was already beginning to replace the wooden wagonway, but the first iron rails stopped some engines in their tracks.
One of the great disadvantages of the early locomotives was they tended to break the track. The track was cast iron in short sections, the locomotives were unsprung, and they would shatter the cast iron rails quite easily. There was a natural conundrum that you really wanted the weight of the engine because that could pull more weight itself. It had adhesion. However, too much weight then broke the track. And it took really a lot of experiments and a lot of time to get over that natural problem.
As track developed, George Stephenson's son Robert was making his own improvements. In 1829, he created a truly revolutionary engine, the rocket, and blasted locomotive design into the modern age. For the first time, slanting pistons replaced vertical cylinders, giving a smoother, faster ride. The rocket set a world land speed record of 29 miles an hour, but such breathtaking velocity had a price.
At the opening of the Liverpool-Manchester, one of the great supporters of that railway and railways in general had been Mr. Huskisson, an MP, and he had a sad accident where he stepped in front of a train. The rocket did remarkably. They put him on it and rushed him to more or less a local hospital. He died, unfortunately, and that was something of a setback, but in a way it proved the effectiveness of the railway train to get him there so quickly.
In the same year Robert's flashy rocket made its debut, his old dad designed a railway with much more basic routes. Boiling water still had its place, and not just for making tea. Inexpensive steam winding engines hauled coal wagons up hills locos couldn't climb. But if the stationary engines were cheap, gravity cost nothing. The loaded wagons freewheeled down the other side, their weight winding up the empties on a pulley system. This self-acting incline could move coal for miles.
The coal came from Blackfell, up to Buckens Hill, and then away from Buckens Hill, straight down to the Jarrow, ships. 9 or 10 mile easy, 9 or 10 mile. Self-acting inclines until it got down to the bottom of Springwell Bank, and the locos took them straight away from there down to Jarrow Steeps. The man that designed this, he must have been a very clever man, and I think it would be George Stephenson, for the simple reason it was clockwork and very cheap concern, and they could never make improvements on it. They got the coal through for a song, for coppers. In fact, one set in the morning paid for everyone's wage. It was about 200 men on this railway, everybody's wage. One set through.
The Bowes Railway saw few changes in its long history. After the National Coal Board took over in the 1940s, the steam-powered engines were gradually replaced by electric motors. But what never changed was the danger of working next to spinning wheels and free-rolling trucks. Tommy Latch is as fighting fit now as when he dodged coal trucks for a living.
I was a wagon examiner. Every truck before it come onto the inclines I examined, looking, checking, wheels, frames, drawbars, everything. So if it was bad, I condemned it. And I could be in front of a coroner any bloody day. I could be in front of a coroner for letting a faulty truck go, and I wouldn't let it go. It was more than my job was worth. So therefore, I used to create safety. What's the brakes like here? What's the brakes like? All right, half a whirl. Get on and do the bugger. Fetch them up, release, shove it up, sand it down, and all the rest of it. Great, great performance. Day after day, week after week, month after month, year after year. No bother, no bother. Your bugger used to kick me height for a lad, you know. Kick me height just for a bit of fun. And you walk like a dog underneath, you know. Underneath the trucks, get under there, and then come back. Do the splits and all sorts some days. You boys when I was young. Oh, I can just do it. Just do it now. You know, I used to check all them for flaws and defects in the gable there. Sometimes them used to jump through there. If you were spread, Them buggers could jump off and over the top and set away. You bugger. I had a hell of a job, I can tell you, but I enjoyed it. Aye, happy days, happy days.
On the 14th of October 1974, the Bowes Railway was closed for good after 148 years.
They wouldn't do it now, Bob. They wouldn't do it now when the lands.
I don't think they would.
No, I don't think so, no. They weren't so daft.
Yeah.
No, not so daft now.
I wanted to say it was necessary then, it was a job.
No, it was a job, it's your bread and butter. Aye, but we had some happy days, hadn't we?
Well, we had some rough days.
Aye, some rough days.
Good men worked on the railway. Oh, aye. Good workers. All good workers, yes. Oh, it used to be good. Aye.
At the end of the last century, designers didn't make daily maintenance easy for the long-suffering engine driver. As the demand for more efficient engines grew, Robert Stephenson pushed steam technology to the limit. And although Robert died in 1859, his pioneering designs lived on.
The A5 was built in 1883 for the Concert Iron Company. There were a lot of very tight curves at Concert, so it needed to be a very short wheelbase. The overall length of the locomotive is 29 feet, and the wheelbase is only 10'9". All of the wheels are in front of the firebox, which gives this long overhang at the back. Unfortunately, with the short wheelbase and the long overhang, it gives a very rough ride in the cab. The back end sways back and forward like this when you're going round curves.
The A5's oiling points were not designed for the faint-hearted.
To oil this engine up, you have to get between the frames underneath the boiler. Now, there's not a great deal of room there. The oiling is very difficult. To get into the frames, you've either got to get into a pit and reach right up, or you've got to lie along the footplate, get yourself jammed between the footplate and the boiler, and then stretch in and get very long arms to get in with the oil. The designers weren't particularly keen on drivers' comforts.
Oh well, it was probably oily enough. Though some aspects of the A5 were a pain, others were pure pleasure.
George Stephenson, he had the idea that you just needed one large tube through the boiler to heat the water up. This is evident in locomotion. Robert Stephenson, his idea was to have a lot of smaller tubes through the boiler, make them as long as possible, and get a lot of heating surface. Now, this locomotive, this one has 198 small tubes in, so you can imagine the amount of heating surface you can get off that as compared with only one tube in. It's quite a pioneering design, this one, in that these long tubes allowed it to have a pressure of 140 pounds per square inch for steam, which made it a very powerful locomotive, ideally suited for moving the heavy trains up at Concert. Industrial locomotives were designed mainly for one-man operation. The design is quite a classic, really, but this one was built in 1883, yet the Concert Iron Company still in 1941 sent the drawings for this locomotive to Robert Stephenson and Hawthorne's of Newcastle and had further locomotives built to exactly the same design.
By the start of the 20th century, British coal trains were straining under 230 million tonnes of coal a year.
What working on the mainland was that you were picking a full load of about 30 trucks, maybe 300 or 400 ton, and taking it down to Sunderland, to the docks. and then bring empties back to the pits. The same with South Dock. When we went to South Dock, which is another siding off, and we used to do just the same.
But something was missing from northeast coal engines: power. Featuring massive cylinders and weighing 61 tons, the first Lambton tank was introduced in 1904. With as much capacity for onboard coal and water as engines with a tender, Robert Stevenson and Co. were onto a winner. It doesn't take long for Andrew Robertson and Harry Hargrave to relight their memories of working these mainline monsters.
All right there, Harry.
All right, away.
Whistle and go. All right, the board's off.
Handbrakes off.
There we go. This is the steam brake. We release it to go forward. We have the reversing handle here in the forward position. This is the regulator, and we give it a little gentle pull, and now we're off. We have to keep an eye on the gauge glasses. The fireman watches them to say that the level of water is all right, and the steam.
Fireman's job to watch the steam, keep the boiler full. This is the injector. Put the water in the boiler. Let's fill the boiler up. Then it's a matter of putting coal on and keeping the steam up. Watch where you're going there.
A driver using too much steam was never popular with a man shoveling coal.
You see, he's got it in full gear there. Now you can leave it in full gear, steam on, and he's using the steam like I didn't know what. And you're lashing the coal on. But if he notches it up, which he should do, pulls it back into... That's notching up. And that's cutting the steam off earlier, so you're not using as much steam. It's allowing the steam to expand in the cylinders earlier, like. And you're not using the steam then, of course. The fireman had a good job then.
We got so used to them that we knew what engine it was by the sound. Some of them engine whistles used to have a very low tone, and you could tell which one. Number 20, for instance, was one of those. Steam engines was much more alive to us.
Steam engines had a character about them. You could get the same type of engine, but you had to work it different, fire it different, had a character, and you used to talk to you when you were working them, really. You know, as they were speeding along the rails there.
Steam was a powerful thing, and we thought maybe diesels wouldn't be so powerful. A lot of the chaps didn't want the diesels when they came.
In the 20s, a lot of people decided that steam was a little bit obsolete and dirty, and they decided that diesel would be the answer.
George Cowell helped build some of Britain's first diesel electrics in 1933.
My generation were the last of the Victorians in the sense of heavy engineering. When I started work as an apprentice, you had to learn very, very quickly. Consequently, at 20-year-old, I built this loco. Nobody had ever built like it before. We were like George or Robert Stevenson. We had nobody to follow, eh? And some of the things we used to get up to build some of these locos were really astronomical and quite dangerous at times. Eventually we got into a rhythm and a way of doing it, but I was still a steam man at heart. It was a very, very successful little loco. There were various types of them made over the years. Some for India, some with a 5'6" gauge, some with 3'6" gauge. They were a little bit before that time because coal was so cheap and the people wouldn't change over from the steam to the diesel, even though they were cheaper to operate. Of the 6 people, still 2 survived. And it makes me feel very old and very, very proud to have been associated with them.
With the advent of diesel, Britain's industrial revolution came full circle. In the greatest railway irony of all, coal, the inspiration for Britain's loco pioneers last century, was still so plentiful by the 1950s that the need for progress to modern fuels was ignored. Steam engineers fought stubbornly for an outmoded power.
It was quite a severe battle, and it was a battle that was being lost because diesels were taking over. After all, you get on a diesel locomotive, you can switch on and go. With a steam locomotive, this morning we've spent 2.5 hours preparing this one before it can go and do any work. In the previous century, we had the locomotive as a new device which was taking over from the horse. Here we've got the last stage in the development of the locomotive in an industrial sense, and this one was trying to stop the ingress of diesel and electric traction.
This engine was one of 5 built for the Steel Company of Wales. But Britain's cutting-edge steam engines were seen as a bit of a joke.
This is a Bagnall locomotive that was built to compete with the diesel market, and it was actually built in 1950, and it incorporates a lot of features like this Walschaerts valve gear that we find more in mainline steam locomotives, not in industrial locomotives. It also has things like roller bearings, which are quite unusual in industrial locomotives, which gives this engine a nice smooth movement.
There was no clambering about with dirty oil cans on the Bagnall. With a delicate top-up of the oil feeder, it was ready to go.
The self-oiling system pumps oil from the lubricator around the locomotive to the cylinders and the glands, and just keeps the moving parts well lubricated through the action of the locomotive itself.
In the decade Russian rocket scientists prepared to blast animals into space, engineers from Stafford were still burning coal and boiling water. Stuck in a Victorian time warp, but still desperate to keep pace with the times, the Bagnall was stuffed with innovative knickknacks. Never again would a driver have to rake out his firebox after a long day. But mod cons like this just proved the absurdity of trying to compete with 20th century machines. The spark had left Britain's locomotive trade, and the Industrial Revolution had burnt itself out.
This was a hotbed of the Industrial Revolution. We were the pioneers. We were the people who invented the steam locomotive. We were the people who were producing steam locomotives, and the whole world was coming to us. By 1950, the whole thing had turned round. We were actually competing in the wrong area, looking at steam locomotives and trying to develop them further, when the development was with diesel-electric locomotives and electric locomotives. This then was the end of the line for industrial steam.
In 1907, Britain manufactured 1,800 locos. Today, we make only a handful. But the legacy left by the pioneers of the Northeast is huge. What started as a coal-carrying pump on wheels triggered a revolution that shook the world.
Commuter trains and the change from steam to electricity is the focus next week. That's at the same time of 8:30 here on 4.
You're working under extreme pressure in Bunbury.
I like to get out into the countryside.
I don't want to live where I work.
Used to leave about 6:30 in the morning and get home about 7:30.
It's nice to be able to come home, relax, get off the train, and you smell the sea air and you think, ah.
I like to go back and do my shopping Saturday morning, up to town.
It's a nice area where I live, and that's where I want to be.
Every working day, almost 500,000 commuters pass through London's train stations. Few ever stop their daydreaming to consider the extraordinary machine that makes their lifestyle possible. But London's railways were not built for commuters.
In the beginning, the whole system operated by steam. There would be smoke and particles of dirt coming through the window, so that you would make sure that if you wanted the window down, you would sit back to engine rather than facing the direction of motion.
But a few specks of soot was a small price to pay to get out of filthy and overcrowded central London.
I moved from the eastern side of London to the far west of the London region, to the limits of the old county of Middlesex. It meant travelling from Baker Street or Great Portland Street to Willesden Green, to Wembley, to Harrow-on-the-Hill.
And so on down the Metropolitan line, a railway with remarkable ambitions. In the mid-19th century railway boom, the Met was part of a grand plan to link Birmingham, London, and through a tunnel, Paris. Sadly, the Met never reached Paris, but it did link London with the countryside.
And I alighted at Eastcote Station, which is one of the little hamlets to the east of Ruislip,
where Len Street found a new community being pioneered.
Londoners played, worked, and travelled. It was the age of Metroland.
Metroland was the collection of commuter towns that sprang up along the old Met Railway. By the 20s, suburbia had been created. For its residents, it seemed to offer a better way of life. For the Met, it meant radical modernisation. Having laid power rails along its line, the Met built fleets of electric locomotives. This is the only survivor of the most successful fleet, introduced in 1922.
Don't suppose there's many Met drivers that actually drove these in service. I mean, I'm getting on to 77.
The last time Don Batchelor piloted an electric loco was almost 40 years ago.
Well, this is your controller, and you put your key in there. Right, that's the first notch. That's in series. Build it up. They were slow off the mark because you were pulling 6 coaches behind them, which was dead weight, nothing pushing. Then we put it over into full. That's full parallel. That's off. And it feels lovely. Though I wish I was back on it again now. Oh dear. And their top speed, I suppose you, on the downhill from Finchley Road to Wembley, on the down gradient, you could get round about the 60 mark.
The trouble was that getting them up to 60 was the easy part.
They were difficult to stop in exactly the right place. Oh yes, yeah. I mean, you've got to think of the weight behind you and the system on the track, the greasy valves, all those things come into it. You didn't overshoot naturally when you run into Baker Street, number 1 or 4 platform, because it's a dead end.
And dead ends were not the only danger.
On these, it's all 630 volt circuits, and even your lights are all the same. And that's why we used to have hats with insulated inside, so you could pull your mains out and you change the fuses and that with using your hat. On this particular day, I grabbed hold of this mains here and my finger touched that. Oh, blowed, and because down I went and I came round a bit and I could smell burning. I felt my hair, I thought it burnt my hair off, but it nasty burns, all blister up here. That was on Sarah Siddons and all this particular loco, so I'm very pleased with that.
These locos were technological pioneers, but they had limits, because until 1962 the Met's electric power rail ended at Rickmansworth. Trains that arrived from the distant suburbia beyond here were steam-hauled. But the commuters still got to town without leaving their carriage.
Steam locomotive went forward into a siding. While that was happening, the electric locomotive was moving out of its siding back onto the London-bound train, hitched up, and the train was away. And in 4 minutes that operation was completed. It was an incredible feat of manpower, I can tell you.
You've got to drop down right next to the steam engine to put your jumpers in, and every time you do that, the firemen used to let the water out of the ejectors, and they used to get soaking wet. Yeah, oh, they always cursing them there, that was, yeah.
The Rickmansworth or Ricky changeover allowed a commuter to compare steam power with electricity.
The steam locomotive, generally in those days anyway, had a slow rate of acceleration. But with the electrics, it was quite remarkable the speed of getaway from a standing start.
But on the other side of London, at Liverpool Street, steam ruled. This was a mainline station for the vast LNER, but it had also been a route to suburbia for a generation, and had handled over 65 million commuters a year by the turn of the century. Because this service predated affordable electric trains, the LNER had been forced to make steam work.
The electric service was no faster than steam. Steam could turn round in 3 minutes at Liverpool Street. 3 minutes for an engine to uncouple, stick a pipe in, people to get in, doors to shut, guard to walk up the other end, change ends of his train, and then wait for the road, engine to run, come on the other end, couple up, get right away, gone.
During the 20s, the rural Lee Valley, northeast of London, was turned into a suburban paradise. And the steam train service that made this happen became a local hero. It even had a nickname.
In the early days, when they first started it, they had yellow and red and blue colours painted on the carriage sides over the doors. This would tell passengers which was first, second and third class, and the colours being rather bright were called jazzy, so hence the jazz was developed.
On the jazz, green meant ladies only. It was an old-fashioned world.
My mother said you should travel in the ladies only, much safer, which I did. And there was this rather formidable team of ladies in the compartment. Old secretaries, of which I am now one of. But, I mean, they looked at you, didn't they? Just looked at you.
Yeah.
And you sat there, and if you got in before they did and happened to take one of their seats, well, nothing was ever said.
Glared at you, glared at you.
You were doomed.
Service it was a good work, it was interesting work, it was hard work. I mean, there was no let-up. You did 5 rounders at Liverpool Street, Enfield, back to Liverpool Street, back to Chingford, back to Liverpool Street. You kept going.
I mean, everybody worked in the city in those days.
Yeah, but there was a crowd of us, wasn't there?
Oh, it was our crowd. Yeah.
Yes.
We filled up one of these compartments quite easily. And we had quite a little club, really.
Yeah.
And we made a lot of friends.
And you didn't ask them their names in those days, and if you did, they would say Mister. And so we nicknamed everyone, didn't we? There was Russian Spy.
Russian Spy. Yeah, he was foreign.
The compartments were 10 to a carriage, 10 carriages, 6 each side, and 6 standing. That was a lot of people.
And then there was the Major, I don't remember.
Yeah, the Major worked for the Corps of Commissionaires.
Yes.
The Jazz was hauled by a specially designed loco. It was called the N7.
They were first introduced in 1914, and 135 of them were built to run the services. And the crews loved them. They were good, comfortable, clean, good riding engines, 3 steamers, economical. They're a nice machine all round.
The N7 was straightforward. 6 small driving wheels and great power from a compact boiler.
It takes you back years, it does, because she's just as I remember them. I mean, they were a lovely engine. They were always boss of the job.
By 1930, London had almost 1 million commuters. Without this workforce flooding in from suburbia, the city would have ground to a halt. From now on, the humble commuter train would be essential to London's survival. The Metropolitan line was once a role model for London's commuter railways. Then, in 1933, it was absorbed by the London Underground, and its trains have since become more and more like tubes. Old Met drivers called tube trains tin cans, and it's hard to imagine these 30-year-old A60s inspiring social change. But mass transit has changed Londoners' lives. This is a garden on the Becontree estate at London's eastern edge. In the 1930s, Becontree was the world's largest housing estate and offered the dream of suburbia, even to the poor, like Phoebe Kirk and her family.
We were living in Islington in 2 semi-basement rooms.
Then Phoebe's baby son David got pneumonia and was dying in the Victorian slums.
The hospital got in touch with Dagenham and they found us a house. We came down here October the 1st, 1931. Felt a different world, different altogether. Own toilet, own everything. You could make your own rules, do what you wanted. Like Edinburgh, fairyland.
Becontree existed because it lay on the railway between Southend and Fenchurch Street. And for under a shilling, a workman could commute into the city, as Phoebe's husband Alfred did.
When we came down here, he gave up smoking to pay the fare because money was very sparse in those days.
The east was traditionally the poorer side of London, and life here was always a struggle for economic survival. But local commuters like Barry Flaxman believed there was no excuse for late trains.
The line came to Southend on Sea, just up the road here, in 1856. It's been neglected from every point of view, from a financial, from a rolling stock, from a locomotive point of view, and until very, very recently, it's been neglected from a management point of view.
The neglect began in the depressed 1930s, when the line's owners, the huge LMS conglomerate, broke a promise made to the Southend Corporation to electrify.
LMS did nothing right the way through until 1933, when it was decided, the corporation decided they would really put on every form of legal pressure they could, and the LMS said, right, we'll build you 37 special locomotives for the line.
The locos were filmed by Peter Peyton, who commuted behind them. He was a train spotter, and so he noticed that these locos were rather special.
The locomotives, of which 2500 was the first one, I would regard as possibly the finest suburban tank engines ever ran in this country. They could move 300 to 400 ton trains, reach maximum speeds of, if pushed a bit, between 80 and 90 miles an hour. I timed one at a speed of 83. They could accelerate, say, with a 350 ton train, from a standing start at a place like Upminster to 34 miles an hour in the first minute, and up to, say, 44 miles an hour in the second minute.
Not exactly hair-raising, but fast for a steam train, because while most locos had just 2 cylinders, one on each side, the 2500 type was built like an express, with an extra 3rd cylinder in the middle.
The 3-cylinder arrangement gives almost a perfect power per revolution of the wheel. When you've got a 2-cylinder, you've got a little bit of unevenness which will throw an engine into a slip. But these type of engine will work a train of 11 coaches out of a station on a wet rail, possibly without any slip at all, quit an electric train.
But the LMS was competing against a rival route to Southend.
All change here for electricity. Steam played its part for years on this line, but it could not meet modern demands for faster, cleaner service, economical working, and more trains. For many years, smoke and steam hung over the trees and fields between Chenfield and Prittlewell. But now the clouds are clearing. The copper wire cable is ready to carry electric power from the new substations.
In 1945, London's commuter railways were in a terrible war-torn state. But the new nationalised industry, British Railways, soon began reconstruction and electrification. The ex-LNER line, running from Southend to Liverpool Street, was one of the first to get power cables. And by 1949, it already had a new electric train, the 306.
In comparison to what the people used to run on, these things were a breath of fresh air. Power-operated sliding doors, light and airy full-length compartments, luggage racks. It couldn't seat that many people. The total number of people on this 3-coach train was only around about 166, and there was about 40 or 64 people in this compartment, but it was built for mass transit because you had the strap hangers for people to hang on to. Of course, as time went on, these became a bit dated, but the people used to still stand and wait for these rather than some of the newer stock because of the comfortable seating. The old bouncy seats, all sprung cushions.
The 306 could accelerate from 0 to 60 in under 90 seconds and was much quicker than the steamers on the old LMS route.
If you stood at one end of the vehicle and looked down here and it was doing full speed of about 65, 70 miles an hour, the sight of about, I don't know what we got here, about 60 odd people all bouncing in unison was quite hilarious to see them all bouncing from side to side as one. It's quite funny.
With the electrification, you could safely sit down in a carriage and get out without having to sort of send your suit to the cleaners, which one had to do quite frequently on a steam train.
And white shirts got absolutely filthy.
Absolutely
Cuffs
filthy.
were filthy, and collars.
Cuffs and collars would continue to get filthy on the old steam LMS route between Southend and Fenchurch Street because it had not been electrified after nationalisation. In fact, it had become BR's misery line.
Well, it was extremely poor, and of course people expected so much more. The war having been over, they expected the return of locomotives that would do the job, better rolling stock from somewhere, and that generally there would be some management attention given to a very important commuter line. In fact, this never materialised. I was lucky enough to live right overlooking the line, and being a student I had a fair amount of spare time, so I kept very accurate records of what was happening. The origin of the train either at Fenchurch Street, Tilbury or Shoebury. Perhaps we better now just wait for the 1340 out on its way to Shoebury. Then I entered how late it was running against the schedule. Here we are in August. Trains running 20 late, 10 late, 34, 27, 19, 19, 21, 18 late, 31, and so on and so on. So I started writing letters to the press. Mr. Henry Channon MP, the Council and the Railway Travellers Association should immediately combine to apply pressure on the apathetic railway company. It's the obvious solution to the present disgraceful situation. Yours sincerely, Barry K. Flaxman. And I believe that the letters which I was putting in the press at around about the age of 18 didn't read quite as if they were from somebody of my age, rather of an old disgruntled gentleman, perhaps in his 50s or 60s. And finally the mayor and town clerk said, well, you better come along with us to the railway executive and express your views and tell him how to do it better.
Barry Flaxman devised a new timetable so that fast trains weren't stuck behind slow ones, and trains no longer detoured beyond Southend to get their windows shut. It worked until 1961, when electricity finally reached the misery line. The spearhead of electricity looked old-fashioned, with its slammed doors and compartments, but these 302s reduced the journey time from Southend to Fenchurch Street by up to 25 minutes. And the timetables changed again, so commuters could make all sorts of new connections.
First day of electrification, we all travelled up together, and I think it was probably about the second or third day. A friend of mine who used to join us at Lee was on Lee Station, and she met Tony on the station, who didn't travel with us at the time. And she said to him, "You travelling up on your own?" So he said, yes. So she said, well, come along and join the crowd in our carriage.
I got in and found there was a seat available, and of course, going up on those trains, on the commuter trains, we used to pass the time very often, a number of us, by playing cards. And my first introduction to Chris was basically asking her to move from a corner seat so that I could sit opposite the chaps I was going to play with, meeting with a smart refusal. Well, one thing led to another, as you will appreciate, and we started going out together.
And we were married about a year later, and we've now been married 32 years.
No complaints. I'm forced to say that, of course. And 2 grown-up daughters.
The Hordens had both retired by 1980, but the 302s soldiered on. Then in 1996, BR's old misery line was privatised. The new owners, the LTS and Railtrack, have invested millions in electronic signals and to replace the 40-year-old 302s. Another new era has begun in suburbia, but it will only last if the lessons of the past are remembered.
Please visit our website for news about new productions that are on the way, and you can support my work on my Patreon page. Thank you.